Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Psychedelic Radio. I'm Christina Thomas, and I am the president and founder of Myself Wellness. And with me is my co-host, Charles Patty, who's Chief Education Officer and Brand Ambassador. Each week, we'll be pushing boundaries, breaking taboos, and shedding light on the use of psychedelic medicines. We want to share expert knowledge and firsthand accounts with those who have experienced transformative psychic shifts using psychedelics. Journeying with us today is Dustin Robinson. Dustin is the leader in the cannabis and psychedelic ecosystem and has been remarked by Psychedelic Invest as one of the top 100 most influential people in psychedelics. As a licensed attorney and certified public accountant with a law firm that exclusively works in the cannabis and psychedelic space, and is the founder of a leading not-for-profit that's paving the way for psychedelic legislation. Dustin is an expert in understanding and raising capital and opportunities within highly regulated industries. In addition, he founded Eater Investment, which is a psychedelic investment platform, and he also co-founded a platform, Nucleus, and is a founding partner of cannabis and psychedelic in the psychedelic space, Mr. Psychedelic Law, and co-founder of the psychedelic nonprofit, Mr. Psychedelic Law.
Hey, Dustin, thanks for being on our show today.
Thank you so much
A
for
mouthful
having
of
me.
a lot of things.
Yeah, there's a lot to say. I didn't realize I was doing so much stuff, but yeah, I appreciate the introduction and appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, for sure. Dustin, we've actually become really good friends with Dustin, and he's an amazing person, and like that scroll right there just shows what an impact he's having on this field. So first, I want to thank you and commend you for your service to humanity and trying to get out here and do all this amazing stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I also want to say I'm very happy to see how far you guys have come. I know we met a couple years ago and you guys were just kind of starting up the clinic, and it was just amazing how far you guys have come. The clinic seems to be doing great. You guys have inserted yourselves as part of the fabric of the psychedelic ecosystem. So commend you guys on all the great work you guys are doing.
Thank you. We appreciate it. So, big news that's out right now is these 4 compounds that DEA just basically lost the scheduling. I believe they were trying to make them Schedule 1 substances. Do you want to touch on that at all?
Sure. Yeah, there was actually 5. It was 5 psychedelic tryptamines that the DEA was looking to potentially put on Schedule 1. So these are psychoactive compounds that were not previously on Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, and DEA was looking to put them on Schedule 1. Luckily, the psychedelic movement and the people behind all the advocacy really pushed back significantly. They provided comments and feedback and challenged it. And just last week, just a few days ago, at the end of last week, the DEA decided to withdraw their proposed rule to schedule those compounds, and instead they're kicking it over to the HHS, which is really the agency that studies medical and scientific research. And with respect to the CSA, it's kind of their job to look at the medical and scientific research and give recommendations to the DEA. So basically the DEA, their position now is, we want the HHS to update the research around these compounds. And then after that, they'll make a decision on whether to schedule them. What I think is most interesting about this is that this is precisely what we've been wanting to happen with the currently scheduled compounds. So, there's a lot of psychedelic compounds that are currently Schedule 1. I think that medical and scientific research needs to be updated by the HHS. So, it would be interesting if out of an abundance of efficiency, the HHS not only looked at these 5 psychedelic tryptamines, but also took a look at the current research and science around the currently listed Schedule 1 compounds. I doubt they will do so, but it'll be an interesting situation if HHS comes back and says that the medical and scientific research does not support these 5 psychedelic tryptamines being scheduled, because, the logic would probably also apply to the currently Scheduled 1 compounds, to the extent that these 5 psychedelic compounds don't belong on Schedule 1. I would think that the other psychedelic compounds that actually have much more research going around the safety and efficacy of them would also not really be proper on Schedule 1. So it's definitely an interesting thing and something that all the viewers should keep an eye on.
Yeah, no, I consider it a really big win, just because it really does open that door. So the other night, Michael Pollan was who just did the documentary How to Change Your Mind, and we had actually talked about that a while ago. But he was on TV and he was basically saying about how in the next 5 or so years that psilocybin and MDA will be, through FDA approval and they'll be being used for medicinal purposes. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say first off, yeah, if any of your viewers have not watched that Netflix series, it's incredible. How to Change Your Mind. It's made my life a lot easier because I get a lot of people reaching out asking like, are psychedelics really helpful? Like I thought they were addictive, and there's so much stigma. And I used to have to send research articles and send all sorts of stuff to them. Now I just direct them to How to Change Your Mind. I'm like, you need to watch this and it will answer your questions, because he does such a good job of just explaining and summarizing the history and where we are currently. And it was really his book, How to Change Your Mind, that I read very, very shortly before meeting both of you, that really inspired me to get deeply involved in the industry. So, definitely I kind of call it the pollen effect, because I think that book inspired a lot of people. And I think this Netflix series is going to inspire a lot more people. And yeah, I think he's absolutely right. Look, MDMA is in phase 3 clinical trials. Hopefully there'll be approval in 2023 or 2024. So, phase 3, for the viewers that don't know, that's pretty much the final phase of clinical trials you need to do. And then, there is other research you do into commercialization afterwards, but we expect for that to be approved and commercialized very shortly. Psilocybin, I think we have a longer time to go. Compass Pathways, the furthest along here in the US. They just finished their phase 2 clinical trials. They should be starting their phase 3 clinical trials. I would imagine those are going to take quite some time. I would estimate maybe approval 2026, 2027, more likely 2027. Yeah, unfortunately, the FDA process takes a very long time, and people are suffering now, which is really the purpose of my nonprofit. While my investment fund is investing in the research, the FDA clinical trials, and some of the trials going on even outside of the country, my nonprofit is focused on city and state legal reform, because people are really suffering now. And while I applaud all the research getting done at an FDA level, if there's a way we could get people access sooner, I think it would just be tremendous.
No, yeah, I completely agree. Watching that film, I hadn't realized that Rick Doblin's been working for 35 years trying to get MDMA pushed through FDA approval, and like it's like literally mapped out every step of how to get it done. Kudos.
Yeah,
to
that
Doblin.
third episode with Maps and Rick Doblin was absolutely awesome. I mean, it really just shows all the incredible work Rick has done, and it explains why he, in my mind, is probably the most influential person in psychedelics, at least in modern day times. I think he's probably the most, if not one of the most influential right now.
For sure. I completely agree with you. So where do you project, what do you see happening with this field?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully MDMA gets approved. Hopefully psilocybin gets approved through the FDA. There's a lot of clinical trials going on right now for other compounds like DMT, mescaline, 2CB, a whole list of psychedelic compounds. And there's a lot of, companies that are now also trying to create, novel chemical entities, new NCEs. And a lot of people get so excited about the current compounds we have, and we have nature, this, that, and the other. But what people don't stop to think about is that once upon a time, LSD and MDMA were novel chemical entities. They were created in a lab, and then people just stopped researching and trying to create new psychedelic chemical entities, right? And so I think, and I'm hopeful that with some of and there's dozens of companies right now trying to develop new chemical entities that are psychedelic. And whether it be reducing the duration of the trip, or even taking the trip out of it, or just hitting different receptors that maybe we don't want to hit, taking out some of the cardiovascular risk. So I think, the future will be, we're going to see some of these traditional psychedelic compounds approved by the FDA. I think we're then going to see new chemical entities that really improve upon the performance of those traditional compounds eventually being approved. It's a much longer road for them because they really got to prove out safety. The traditional compounds have a long history of safety and efficacy. So, to some extent, phase one is relatively simple for them. But for these new chemical entities, you're really starting at the very beginning with preclinical work and then, phase one work. So it's going to take probably 10 to 12 years before we see a new chemical entity approved. But hopefully that will be, the future. And then at a city and state level, Oregon is rolling out Measure 109 January of next year. You got Colorado with the bill, California with the bill. So I think we're also going to start seeing a lot of states passing proactive measures to create their own legal frameworks around psychedelics. So it's going to be an interesting time, and we'll see what happens. I'm hopeful that the state regulations are create the right container, and they have the right guardrails around it, so that things we don't take 10 giant steps backwards if some bad stuff happens. So I think it's just very important, even watching How to Change Your Mind and understanding, the first two episodes go through how some of the, MDMA and LSD essentially were originally used for medical use. And then, once they got into, outside of medical use and started being used more, for mind exploration or recreationally, whatever you want to call it, that's when really the government clamped down on it, because some bad instances happened. There was no guardrails around those people using them. So I'm hopeful that we don't, we learn from mistakes of the history, and we do these in a responsible way, and really it all starts with education. So it's really just these are safe compounds, but people need to be educated on how to use them safely. So really big on education, and that's part of the reason I do so many of the events that I do, and why you guys have this podcast, right? It's all about educating the public and push legal reform, but also make sure that it's responsible legal reform that's in conjunction with educating the public.
We're really in alignment with that statement, just because it, like with as taboo as this field is, and with the reputation that some of these compounds had, in the 70s, and some of the stories that you've heard, we have to be incredibly careful that everything is done really well to make sure, because just like that one bad story could really taint this industry for everyone.
Yeah. Do you think, because in the ketamine world, right, there's some companies that we feel irresponsibly send ketamine to people's homes, but do you think that's going to be the same with these other compounds, or do you think that it's going to be even more regulated?
Yeah, well, definitely it's the wild, wild west right now with ketamine. So, it's being used off label. So there's no really specific REMS or protocols that need to be followed unless you're using S-ketamine or Spravato. But with just the generic ketamine, there's really no standards built around them. So people are really doing all sorts of different stuff with them. And, just all it takes is one or two bad actors, and, ketamine gets a bad name. And, I think there'll be a lot more guardrails, especially for the FDA approved drugs. Like MDMA it's looking like they're going to have very restrictive REMS where you have to take it at a certified site with a certified clinician under a specific protocol, and so on and so forth. So it's not going to be something you could go and take home and, use on your own, which, for ketamine, you don't really have those types of limitations. So I think, they're starting off with very restrictive REMS, but, talking to Rick Doblin and MAPS, I know the intention is to create more flexibility, right? As we learn more about these compounds, as we educate the public more and more, I think you could start to remove some of those guardrails. So I think it's important to kind of start with the guardrails, a lot of guardrails, and then as we learn and the public learns as well, and we gather research, I think you could start to take those guardrails off. But it's important to note that those guardrails do increase costs. So there's kind of these two underlying themes that are somewhat pulling at one another. We want to provide, access to many at, not excessive costs, but we also want to have proper guardrails. The more guardrails you put up, the more expensive it is. So in order for this industry to really blossom and flourish, we really can't have that crazy of guardrails put up. It's just too expensive. So I think we're going to start off with a lot of guardrails, and very slowly, hopefully, we'll be able to take down some of those guardrails.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you and State Representative Mike Greco had drafted legislation to decriminalize psilocybin in the state of Florida. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what we drafted through my nonprofit, and it was filed by Mike Greco, who's the state representative. We drafted a bill. It did include decriminalization, but it also created a legalized framework. So a lot of, for those viewers that don't know, difference between decrim and legalization. Decrim basically just lowers as a priority possession and use, and basically takes away enforcement of possession and use. It doesn't allow commercial sale of psychedelic compounds. So when you hear Denver, Santa Cruz, Oakland, DC, all these different cities and states that are decriminalizing, it doesn't mean that there's a commercial market for it. It's just, they're moving it as a low priority as far as possession and use goes. If you sell it, it's still illegal even in those jurisdictions. Legalization is really allowing commercialization and sale. And right now, Oregon is the only state that currently has a legal framework. And so the bill we filed had both decrim language in it as well as legalization language in it. And in many respects, it took a lot of what was in Measure 109 out in Oregon, but we did make some revisions to that in areas that we thought were necessary.
Do you think there's any possibility of it going through anytime in the near future?
I don't think that bill will go through. Our strategy was to ask for everything in that first bill and then start to tailor it back. So in this last session, there was a research bill filed, much more simple, much less controversial. Basically was just saying, hey, these compounds are being researched at a federal level and showing safety and efficacy. As a state, we should not wait. We should research them ourselves. I mean, who could argue with that when you're looking at some of the results of the MDMA phase 3 clinical trials where, 2/3 of the participants who had PTSD were no longer clinically diagnosed with PTSD after going through MDMA psychedelic assisted therapy. So over 2/3 of people with PTSD after going through MDMA psychedelic assisted therapy no longer had it. So, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I think we all want to support the veterans, and there's so many veterans suffering with PTSD. Oh. So why would you not want to at least research it and understand this better so that, we could get these veterans and others suffering from PTSD, get them the help that they need. So, I think, we did a research bill in the last one. We're now in discussions about what we want to do in this next session. And most likely it will be something around research. And honestly, it's really just time and money. If people put the time in and the money and we have some money behind what we're doing, I absolutely believe that it could be passed here in Florida. Everyone I talk to is interested. I talk to very few politicians that tell me screw off. I'm not a lobbyist by trade. I even as a lawyer, I really don't spend a lot of time lobbying. So it really just takes groups that are willing to put in the time to educate all these different politicians to try to ensure we get something voted through.
For sure.
I was going to say, how do you have even time to try to lobby when?
you guys heard my list of stuff.
I know.
I got a lot going on. So I, most of my time right now is spent with my investment firm. I prioritize that because I think my best contribution to this industry is deploying capital into it. You could go to the top of the mountain and scream all you want, but at the end of the day, for good or for bad, capital is what the industry really needs to push it forward. So we've been very, very active in, getting capital, raising capital, number one, and now, deploying capital into the industry. So that's where most of my time is spent. Doesn't mean that the lobbying side and all the other stuff doesn't matter. It's just right now it's the area where I'm prioritizing.
No, I think it's really important. Like money is energy and it makes things happen. Without it, the things are like, you like you said, people can have a really strong mouthpiece, but money talks in this industry, and that's really what, I commend you for what you're doing. So
Thank
do
you.
you want to, can you touch on Nucleus a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So our investment fund, we generally invest and take minority positions in different research organizations in the psychedelic industry. And we help get them the capital to kind of get them started. We generally invest seed Series A, but we saw this void in the market on really the marketing, the data, and the technology side of the industry. So Nucleus is really kind of an incubator where we launch some of our own businesses where we see white space. So our fund owns Nucleus entirely, and we operate Nucleus entirely, and we're basically incubating different companies that we think could help break stigma and raise awareness around mental health and psychedelic medicines and just educate the public. So, for example, one of our assets under Nucleus is psychedelicinvest.com, which is basically a website that provides data and analytics about companies for those that are interested in investing or just learning more about the business and investing side of the industry. We also have another website called Newly, NEULY.com, which is probably one of the largest databases of psychedelic information, has every company in there, all the investors. It has clinical trial data. It has patents that have been filed, the institutions that are doing different types of research. So it's just tremendous database that collects information. And we have about 6 or 7 other companies under Nucleus that we've launched. So it's really become kind of an incubator of different areas where we see some white space and we see some need in order to push the industry forward.
For sure.
And one of the things we do through Nucleus is we do events. And I know I've had Charles on some of my panels, and it's weird to have a conversation with Charles without getting a huge standing ovation after everything he says, because whenever you have Charles on a panel, the audience tends to really like the stuff he has to say. So yeah, Charles has been on several, part of Nucleus is breaking down stigma and raising awareness, like I mentioned. So we do panels all across the country, and we've had the benefit of having Charles on a couple of them. He's been an incredible panelist, definitely an audience favorite.
He is a crowd pleaser. People like to listen
Yes.
to him. I don't like to listen to him, but everybody else.
I really appreciate that, man. And and kudos to you, man. You're really out there and you're doing the deal, and you're a genuine guy, and I appreciate you for that. So if you were going to give a message to everybody out there, like maybe that we're second guessing, possibly trying to use psychedelic compounds to heal in a safe way, through like maybe even just ketamine right now, we can touch on that because it's FDA approved. But what would you say to people that are questioning whether this would be the right move for them?
Tell them to go to My Self Wellness in Bonita Springs.
I like it.
I love it.
Boom. No, I mean, look, obviously that's a good place to start, right? If you have a trusted clinic that's doing it the right way, it's definitely a good way to, if you're a novice, good way to kind of ease your way into psychedelics is, going to a clinic like My Self Wellness, where they're going to have the proper care that you need, and it's going to be done in a safe way. I mean, my story is I'd never tried any psychedelic compounds up until 3 years ago. So I'm 37. So it wasn't until I was 34 years old. And I basically carried that stigma with me all my life until, I read Michael Pollan's book and started reading some of the research, started working with, different groups like you guys that were educating me on it. And then I had my own experience. And it was the totally opposite of what I've been told all my life. And, I thought it was a debilitating compound. I thought it turned your brain into mush. And, then I have, my first psilocybin experience, and, you feel your mind opening up. It's quite the opposite of turning your brain into mush. You have your neurons firing on all cylinders, and, you really feel that neuroplasticity happening, and, things that problems you may have had that were complicated, you tend to just gain clarity on. So, for people who, I don't advocate any illegal use of any psychedelic compounds. I will say that. But if you are taking them legally, whether it's at a ketamine clinic or going outside of the country and accessing these in a legal way, I just recommend people to be open about the possibilities, and also just not to fight the compound. And, hear about bad trips, and I think people just sometimes the bad trips, it's kind of the person fighting the medicine off, and just to be relaxed and understand that this medicine is pretty damn safe. It's a very safe medicine. There really aren't people ODing on ketamine or psilocybin. There are people ODing on cocaine, heroin, opioids, all those other things. Those are very unsafe to take. So subjectively, you might be going through something in your head where you may feel unsafe, but always coming back to that place of understanding that you're in a safe place, assuming you're doing it in a safe place, like Myself Wellness or at a retreat in another country, whatever it might be. So yeah, that would kind of be my advice for people.
No, I love it, man. Listen, Joe Rogan says basically along the lines of what you just said. He's like, listen, the drugs have a huge label, like drugs covers a huge amount of different compounds and substances, from NyQuil to cocaine to alcohol to nicotine to heroin. And he said, and there's a lot of drugs out there that have that negative connotation because they're not good for you, like meth, cocaine, and heroin. But then you have some drugs that can be good drugs, like psychedelic compounds, which tap us into higher states of consciousness. We can heal trauma or even generational trauma. And so I think, like one thing that I've been doing in my daily practice when I'm talking to people about this stuff is like, I actually just really just keep referring it to medicine, so we can really take those taboos and stigmas away, because drug has such a negative connotation to it. But these psychedelic medicines and compounds can change your life.
Yeah, I've stopped referring to them as psychedelics. I always call them psychedelic medicine. So absolutely, that's the right way to refer to them, in my opinion.
Beautiful.
So if anybody was looking to contact you, how would they do that?
Best way to contact is probably through my investment firm website, eterinvestments.com. There's a way you could just contact us on the website. It's ITERinvestments, plural.com, eterinvestments.com. And yeah, you can reach out to me through that, whether you're looking to go do advocacy stuff or whatever. If you reach out through there, it comes to my email address, and I'll be sure to point you in the right direction.
Amazing. I would say follow him on social accounts, but you never know if it's real or not, because people keep trying to be this guy.
Yeah, I've been having some issues with people creating fake accounts, but yeah, you're welcome to follow me on Instagram. It's Dustin R10. It's not Dustin R100 or Dustin R10 exclamation point. Yeah, so unfortunately I've had to deal with that quite a bit, but it's all good.
Well, this was amazing. Just to let everybody out there know one more time, Dustin is an amazing person who is really changing the game out there and paving the way for this industry. And we really commend you and appreciate you for that.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me, and thank you for all the work you guys are doing. I'm very fortunate to be able to work with you guys. And anytime you want me back on the show, just let me know. I'll be here.
Excellent. Man. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this edition of Psychedelic Radio. You can download our past episodes of our program by going to cannabisradio.com or by subscribing to our show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. To learn more about psychedelic ketamine therapy, please visit our website at myselfwellness.center. Thank you for joining us today. And if nobody's told you that they love you lately,
we do.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.